Here's a little webinar to help you with task 27 in your Jekyll and Hyde booklets. And a question you may want to ask yourself is, have you solved the mystery yet? Poole believes at this point in the story that Hyde has murdered his master, Dr. Jekyll, and is living in his laboratory. So why is Poole so convinced that it is not Jekyll living there? Let's read the extract and see if we can find out. "Sir," said the butler, turning to a sort of mottled pallor, "that thing was not my master, and there's the truth. My master," he looked around him and began to whisper, "is a tall, fine build of a man, and this was more of a dwarf." Utterson attempted to protest. "Oh, sir," cried Poole, "do you think I do not know my master after 20 years? Do you think I do not know where his head comes to in the cabinet door, where I saw him every morning of my life? No, sir, that thing in the mask was never Dr. Jekyll. God knows what it was, but it was never Dr. Jekyll. And it is the belief of my heart that there was murder done." "It is well, then, that we should be frank," said the other. "We both think more than we have said. Let us make a clean breast. This masked figure that you saw, did you recognize it?" "Well, sir, it went so quick, and the creature was so doubled up, that I could hardly swear to that," was the answer. "But if you mean, was it Mr. Hyde? Why, yes, I think it was. You see, it was much of the same bigness, and it had the same quick, light way with it. And then, who else could have got in by the laboratory door? You have not forgot, sir, that at the time of the murder he still had the key with him. But that's not all. I don't know, Mr. Utterson, if you ever met this Mr. Hyde." "Yes," said the lawyer, "I once spoke with him." "Then you must know as well as the rest of us that there was something queer about that gentleman, something that gave a man a turn. I don't know rightly how to say it, sir, beyond this, that you felt in your marrow kind of cold and thin." "I own I felt something of what you describe," said Mr. Utterson. "Quite so, sir," returned Poole. "Well, when that masked thing like a monkey jumped from among the chemicals and whipped into the cabinet, it went down my spine like ice. Oh, I know it's not evidence, Mr. Utterson. I'm book learned enough for that. But a man has his feelings, and I give you my Bible word, it was Mr. Hyde." Some tricky vocabulary there. There isn't actually too much tricky vocabulary, I don't think, but mottled pallor just means that Poole's face is very white, but it will have spots of colour in it, kind of reflecting the fact that he's quite fearful. Marrow just refers to his bone marrow. And queer, it just means, in this case, strange or odd. So it's just an odd way of behaving. So how does Poole describe Hyde to make him seem like a monster? And could we find 4 quotations in the extract that show this? Well, let's go back. First of all, we can think about how why Poole is so certain that this isn't just Jekyll living in the laboratory, which would be much more reasonable. Well, first of all, he gives some quite rational explanations for why he's quite convinced this can't be his master. He's aware of exactly how tall his master is. He's seen him come down and go through the cabinet door many times. He knows exactly how tall he is. And yet this man is much shorter, and he describes him as more of a dwarf. He also is aware that this man has a key. There must be a reason. It has to be Hyde, because this man's got a key, and the only Mr. Hyde other than Jekyll would have a key to get into this place. But when he starts to describe Hyde, it becomes really obvious that he sees Hyde in a very monstrous way. He describes him as a thing in a mask. He describes him as having this kind of quick, light way, which makes him seem unpredictable and scary. And he certainly describes the sort of way he reacts when he sees Hyde, which is the way that everybody reacts when they see Hyde. They react with a sense of disgust or loathing or fear. And this just any encounter with Hyde inspires a kind of chilling feeling down the back of his spine. It kind of makes his marrow feel cold and thin, he says there. And he says it went down my spine like ice. So just from his own reactions, he's making it quite clear that he reacts in the way that everyone does when they encounter Hyde. The simile, like a monkey, also creates a zoomorphic image, suggesting Hyde is more like an animal than a human. This is reinforced by the description of how he moves. When Poole describes him, he uses verbs like jumped and whipped. They suggest that all his movements are unpredictable. He seems like a cornered animal that's moving very fast and unpredictably. He clearly inspires fear and disgust. He doesn't seem like a normal human being, and that's the sort of reaction that everyone's reported when they encounter Hyde. Stevenson describes the physical impact he has on Poole with a simile, "went down my spine like ice." Poole reacts with real horror in his presence. He turns his blood to ice. The description of a masked thing makes him appear sinister and hidden, and the indefinite noun thing dehumanizes him. This is repeated with that thing in the mask. He's described as that creature. This has connotations of something really inhuman, animalistic, or maybe monstrous. His presence inspires terror. This is built up throughout the whole of the chapter in the description of the servants huddling and crying, the tension that is built as Poole reveals his fears to Utterson, and the pathetic fallacy surrounding the whole scene. And Poole turns to God for guidance. God knows what that thing was, suggesting it is beyond the understanding of a normal man. So throughout the whole of this extract, you'll see Hyde being described in a very monstrous way, and as a character that inspires terror and fear, and is clearly, as far as Poole is concerned, has clearly done something absolutely terrible to his master, potentially murdered him. Following on from this task 27, you're asked to complete task 28, and that's to try and make some links throughout the novel so far of all the different descriptions you've had of Hyde, and think about why Hyde is continually being presented as this monstrous character, or indeed as a terrifying outsider. And hopefully before you watch on in this webinar, you may make sure you've completed this. So you might want to pause me now for a moment and see if you can find for yourself, or remember for yourself, a few quotations that create this very terrifying, monstrous outsider view of Hyde. Now, I'm just going to give you a few quotations that might help you here. So from the very outset of meeting Hyde, we hear that he behaves in a really horrible way. He left a child screaming on the ground. He's also described as murdering a poor old man with ape-like fury. In the description of the way he behaved with the young child, he trampled calmly over her body, a juxtaposition that's really disturbing, because trample suggests something very animalistic, but calmly suggests complete lack of remorse or care. Everyone reports a feeling of deformity when they see Hyde. Everyone sees him as a deformed character, but unlike the picture that you see in front of you there, actually the Hyde that's described in the novel doesn't really have any actual deformity. There's nothing anyone can put their fingers on and actually explain why they feel he's deformed. He's described as having, when Utterson first speaks to him, he takes a hissing intake of breath. The hissing just sounds very animalistic and snake-like, doesn't it? And that links to this very biblical imagery of him having Satan's signature on his face. So he seems to be being linked to the devil. He's described as having something troglodytic about him. He's almost like an uncivilized prehistoric man. And again, with the sounds that he produces, he snarled aloud with a savage laugh. Just thinking about some of the methods that Stevenson uses to describe Hyde as this terrifying outsider. When he's cruel and does not conform to the normal moral expectations of Victorian gentlemen, all of that behaviour of the child immediately introduces him as an incredibly cruel character. Stevenson repeatedly uses imagery that suggests he's unevolved or even prehistoric. This plays into the Victorian fear of recidivism, the fear that their wonderful empire might go backwards or in some way be destroyed. The simile ape-like is perhaps a reference to Darwin's theory of evolution. Hyde has not evolved into a civilized human being. The religious imagery suggests he's devilish and evil, leaving him outside of God's grace or Christian values. And this is repeated time and time again throughout the novel. Stevenson uses onomatopoeia, as we talked about earlier, to show that the sounds he makes are animalistic. He snarled, has connotations of a wild beast, and hissing suggests a snake. The snake imagery has strong connotations of evil, linking directly to the snake that tempted Eve in Genesis in the Bible. So hopefully that might help you think about how Hyde as a character throughout this novella is being captured as this terrifying, monstrous, and frightening outsider to everything that the Victorians held dear. I hope that this webinar has been useful to you, and take care of yourselves, Year 10.